Papillon, the French for butterfly. Not, let's show it back to the front here. Not Papillon, some people say. The double L, it's Papillon, butterfly. Henry Charrière's 1969 released a supposed autobiography of his time as a prisoner in French Guiana, deported to French Guiana for a murder he always denied committing, the murder of a pimp in 1930 when he was only like, he got found guilty, I think he was 25, and he got life in French Guiana on a penal colony and deported to French Guiana. And yeah, just a fantastic book. They made a film out of it, Steve McQueen, which differs in places from the book. There's some weird things. I don't know if it's symbolic of the title after a while, but when they're prisoners, they're made to like catch big butterflies with nets and stuff, which is not in the book. I don't know why they stuck some of the stuff in, because the book's certainly got enough action adventure in it. But anyway, what do I know? It's a great film. Steve McQueen, Dustin Hoffman, this Degar, the kind of bookish guy who's got all the money, and he has a sort of more of a role in the film than he did in the book. In the book, he starts off, he's gonna find Papillon becomes his bodyguard basically, as is in the film as well. But he's going to finance their breaks, their attempted escapes. But in the book, he kind of phases out after a while. He decides he's just going to stick it out and do the sentence, whereas Papillon's determined to escape. But in the film, it's right to the end. See Steve McQueen jumping off these huge cliffs. It was like, and it's in the book. This great thing. He's done Papillon. He's in the book. To go out the book, in the end he's sent to Devil's Island, and he's had multiple escape attempts. Done years of solitary. Still not beaten. He's 35, and he's saying, "Am I never going to go away from this place?" And he looks out at the sea, and he suddenly realizes that he could chuck himself into the sea on a raft made out of coconuts and get away that way. And eventually they figure out, I think it's every 7th wave that comes in is the one that's powerful enough to get away. All the others will just bring him back to the shore. So he hurls himself off a cliff, as anyone who watches the film or has read the book will know, supposedly. But one of the big criticisms of Papillon is that he took considerable artistic license, Henry Charrière. And one thing I've read, apparently Devil's Island, I had a look on the internet. I found some photos of it, and I can't tell for sure, but apparently there's just no place on the so-called Devil's Island where he could have thrown himself off this great big cliff. It pretty much runs down to the shore. In places it's a bit, maybe 10 feet up or something, but there's no huge cliff which he would have thrown himself off, which seems to have been a big blooper. But I mean, that's only, I've read that, someone who critiqued it, and they seem to know their stuff. It's a few years back now, but on the photos as well, it doesn't look like there's any place that high. Certainly not like as is depicted in the film or described in the book. So that's one of the many criticisms of Papillon, that he made a lot of it up. And when pressed on it, I think Papillon, or Henry Charrière, when he was sort of reveling in his fame from having written this book and at last made some money, some real money, he said, "Oh, I didn't take a typewriter with me when I was sent to penal to record everything that happened to me, and maybe 75% of it is true." So he started trying to fudge it a bit, and all the stories in it, what seems certain is that he was a great storyteller. People who knew him said he told stories and he amused people in penal that way, helped pass the time. Anyone could tell a good story or play an instrument or play cards or anything. But yeah, he'd heard a lot of stories, all this sort of saving the girl from the sharks, what some of the guys went through when they were put in solitary, which he claims to have done years of, and all these various other stories that he'd heard, and he mixed up. I mean, it's genius. He mixed it all up into his life, and apparently, first of all, he wrote the book, and he wrote a book as a novel in the third person. He submitted to the publishers. And the publishers came back to him and said, "If you write in the first person, we'll publish this." And Charrière was away. And his translator, I can't remember his translator's name, Patrick O'Brien, when he translated from French into English, he said it wasn't unusual for Charrière to do 5,000 words a day, which is why you get that great flow in the book. It really is like someone talking to you, just you're sitting down with Charrière having a drink and just telling you everything. And apparently he had a really great husky voice. Apparently this is if he understood French because he couldn't speak English. So yeah, if you're English, we know like, but he'd learned a few other languages, I think Spanish especially, after when he was free, just by working. He went to Venezuela. He just picked that up by ear. Working as a street seller and all this sort of thing. So yeah, he invented a few stories and weaved it all together, and he's certainly not shy in depicting himself as a really great dude. Charrière, basically, he's scrupulously fair, honest. He says he was a wide boy in Paris, which is why the police had it in for him to pin a murder on him that he never committed, murder of a pimp. Because like he was a real flash Harry, and apparently a little dog, and he'd named it after the chief of police in Paris. You know, he'd walk past Les Flics, as they're dismissively called. I think in French slang, basically pigs, doesn't it, or something? And he'd go, come on, whatever the name of the dog was, was also the chief of police in Paris, and the cops could hear him. So they had it in for him, and they pinned this murder on him. And he was tried, and he was shipped out. And life till he died. And what happened? The penal colony basically fizzled out in the 50s, and they say that by that time you could, if you had a way off it, you could just basically get out. He just could never go back to France again, so he went to Venezuela. Eventually went to France when his book was successful. He describes it in the follow-up Bangkok. And he went there, and that's when after the book got famous and then making the movie, that's when they tried to the book's like The Four Truths of Papillon, which is basically calling out that a lot of the book has been bulls. As he was his favourite word, don't talk bulls all the time. But stuff like the solitary, by the time he was in solitary, it was like you were put in a cell in semi-gloom. In the movie they shut it off as a punishment, so you're in complete darkness. That you'd be put in this cell in the gloom, absolutely no talking allowed, no noise of any kind. The warders would patrol above on like steel walkways, and they'd wear slippers, so even they didn't make any noise. Starvation rations, all this sort of thing, and nothing to distract you. No books, nothing. And they get sentences of years sometimes. At one point, Papillon claims to have received 8 years, of which he served, I think it was 18 months before things changed and he managed to win his freedom. And again, apparently by that point, the solitary system was kind of, they weren't doing that. But right at the beginning, they were doing these absolutely inhumane those types of sentences, several years or months on end in the gloom, in absolute silence, with nothing to occupy you. Papillon he says in the book, the Chinese invented the water torture, the French invented silence. They take away everything that could occupy your thoughts. But apparently by the time Charrière was shipped out, there were short lengths of solitary, and you were allowed out to sort of bathe in the sea with the other prisoners, and as long as you sort of kept the conversation low, you could still talk and stuff. I mean, obviously it was no picnic, but still very, very different to being shut in a cell on your own for years on end. But when he describes the cells, even he says, like, that put Charrière in cell 234. You think, God, how many of these cells did they have? How many of these guys were allegedly in solitary, sorry. And Papillon says he could overhear the warders whispering to each other, and they'd be always finding men hanged. Lots of people were committing suicide and stuff. So there's this Papillon's. He describes it again. Consummate storyteller. He describes how he got through solitary, inventing these epic journeys in his mind, and all this sort of thing. And plus, he's got a friend on the outside who's ensuring he gets a coconut every day for nutrition, and even a few cigarettes, which he manages to smoke without the warders realising. Well, he gets away with it for a while, but then he gets caught near the end, and they reduce his rations even further for the last few months. And he just about survives that one. And that's 2 years, and then later on, like I say, he gets 8 years. But it's absolutely, when you read it, you think shit, and it poses questions in your own mind, like how the hell would anyone get through something like that? But I love this book, and despite a lot of it having been disproven and it being I think saying 50-50 fact and fantasy is being generous. I mean, certainly Charrière was charged with the murder of a pimp, and he was shipped out to solitude to penal colony in French Guiana. But after that, anything's up for grabs as to what did or did not happen to him personally. And woven through its central theme is this absolute desire to escape, and his various attempts to escape, which make for great storytelling. He gets away pretty soon after he gets, I think for a good few months. He gets recaptured and taken back, so he gets his first spell of solitary. Just a really uplifting book anyway. Excellent storytelling, and I noticed, sadly in my life, I've had to visit a few basically, hospices basically to see people out, cancer and stuff. But they always seem in the library or the communal room. They always had shelves, and they always seem to be like a copy of Papillon on, because it's it's almost like a sort of medicine to embolden the spirit for anyone going through a hard time. And that would be the hardest time, wouldn't it, if you're on your way out? Still, it's one of those books that people have credited from saving them from depression and mental health problems. So it's as well as being a riveting tale, it uplifts people when they need uplifting. Yeah, just a really good book. I made it so many times. This one's falling apart. This is I don't know how many copies I've had of it now. They did some stupid. They abridged it. They rewrote it. I think it's on Kindle, and it's just rubbish. It needs the full book, and Charrière's. Excuse me. Can't help myself. It needs Charrière's words. It shouldn't be tampered with, in my humble opinion. So it was this one, and then I think it was the same year he died. He died of throat cancer, age 66. Charrière. He released Banco, which is his follow-up adventures. Probably, again, best taken with a pinch of salt. It's a pretty good book, Banco. It's not as good as Papillon, but was anything ever going to be as good as Papillon? No. I mean, Papillon's a one-off, so whatever he did was not going to match up to Papillon. But for all that, it's a great book, and it's kind of in the same vein, just not so startling. As I say, just has more and more adventures, and even if it didn't all happen as he quite describes it, still makes for riveting stories. Who was it said then? Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Maybe that was, how do you say that in French?